I've never been one to jump to conclusions or make rash decisions, but some things you can't ignore. And when I caught my son-in-law trying to open the secret vault in my office, I knew that the quiet life I'd worked so hard to build was about to be shattered. My name is Margaret Hunter. I'm 55 years old, a mother of 2, and a grandmother of 4. My husband, Thomas, and I built our family's wealth from the ground up. We started with nothing but a small home and a dream. Over the years, we grew Hunter Enterprises into a thriving business. We never lived extravagantly, but we didn't need to. We had everything we needed, and the most important thing for me was family. The company was always my pride, but my children, Rachel and Peter, were my heart. And when Rachel married Richard, well, I welcomed him into the fold. It wasn't love at first sight, nothing ever is, but I saw potential in him. He was hardworking, ambitious, and, most importantly, he cared for Rachel. At least, that's what I thought. For years, things went smoothly. We had our family gatherings, the kids grew up, and the business prospered. But as time passed, something in the air shifted. It was subtle at first, little things that didn't sit right with me. Richard started showing up to company events more often, asking questions about things I thought he didn't need to know. He was never overly inquisitive, but I could see the curiosity behind his polite smile. Then, about 2 months ago, I noticed something odd. Late one evening, I was working late in my office, going over some financial reports. I've always been a night owl, a habit that has stuck with me since my younger days. My office, tucked away in the back of the house, had always been my sanctuary, a place where I could focus and think. The door was slightly ajar when I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was Rachel. She often stopped by for a chat after dinner, especially if she had a rough day at work. But the footsteps didn't sound like hers. They were too deliberate, too calculated. My heart skipped a beat when I heard the faintest creak of the floorboards. Someone was in the hallway, someone who shouldn't have been. I waited, holding my breath, praying it wasn't what I feared it might be. But then I heard a soft knock at the door, followed by Richard's voice. "Margaret? You still awake?" His tone was casual, but there was something in his voice that made me hesitate. It didn't sound right. It wasn't like the way he usually spoke to me, light and playful. This was clipped, almost like he was trying to cover something up. "Yes, Richard." "Come in," I called out, trying to sound calm, even though my stomach was twisting with unease. I braced myself for what was coming next. The door opened slowly, and Richard stepped inside, his face flashing a quick, nervous smile. "Sorry to bother you so late, I needed to ask you something about the office safe." I narrowed my eyes. "The safe?" I repeated, trying to mask the shock I felt. For the last decade, the safe had been my domain. It contained the most sensitive documents, business contracts, financial records, and, most importantly, my husband's last will. Thomas had been adamant about keeping the safe locked at all times, and I respected that. It was a relic of a time when we had to keep everything close to the chest. Now, with our company in its prime, it seemed more of a precaution than a necessity. Still, the safe was never discussed, never questioned. Richard nodded, stepping a little closer to my desk. "Yeah, I was just wondering if I could take a look at the combination. I know you keep it locked, but with everything going on in the company lately, I thought it might be time to go over a few things." His eyes flicked nervously toward the filing cabinet, the one that housed the secret compartment with the safe. I could almost see the calculation in his eyes, the subtle shift in his posture as he tried to act casual. I leaned back in my chair, studying him intently. I could tell he was trying to play it cool, but there was something off about his demeanor. I'd known Richard long enough to recognize when he was hiding something. And right now, he was hiding something. "Richard," I began, my voice steady but firm. "What exactly are you looking for in that safe?" "I'm the one who handles the company's finances, and I've always kept things in order. There's nothing in there you need to worry about." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his smile faltering for just a second. "Well, it's just that," he hesitated, clearly trying to come up with a plausible excuse. With the changes happening, I thought it might be time for me to get a better understanding of the company's structure, you know? Rachel and I are really starting to take on more responsibility, and I just thought it would be helpful. I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. His just didn't sound genuine. And the way he was talking about taking on more responsibility, it didn't sit well with me. Was he implying something? Trying to edge his way into a position of control? Was it a power grab I hadn't seen coming? I crossed my arms, leaning forward slightly. "Richard," I said again, softer this time but with an edge that let him know I wasn't fooled. "The safe is off limits, and I suggest you respect that." His face faltered for a second, but then his composure returned. "Of course. Sorry, Margaret. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." He gave me that same forced smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "I'll leave you to your work." As he turned and walked toward the door, I sat there, frozen in place. Something was wrong. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew it was big. Richard wasn't asking about the safe for no reason. He wasn't casually mentioning it just because he was interested in the company's structure. There was something more to it, something he wasn't telling me. I spent the next hour in my office, staring at the safe across the room, my mind racing. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed to know what Richard was up to. And I had to find out before it was too late. The next few days were a blur of mundane tasks, as if the world was trying to pretend nothing unusual had happened. Richard avoided me, which only made my suspicion grow. I could feel it in my bones, that unease that never quite went away. I wasn't going to let it slide. If there was something hidden in that safe, I would find it, no matter how far I had to go. I told myself it was just precautionary. I needed to be sure. Maybe Richard had gotten too ambitious, or maybe he had been pressuring Thomas for more access. There was no telling what kind of hold he might have on my daughter, Rachel. I loved my daughter with everything in me, but I also knew how easily people could manipulate the ones they loved. Richard had always been charming, but charm could easily become control when mixed with ambition. I had seen it before. Late one evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I decided to do something I should have done months ago. I was going to get into the safe. I knew the combination. It was my husband's design, a system only he, Thomas, and I were privy to. It was simple enough for someone like me to remember, but not so obvious that anyone would guess it. The office was quiet, almost too quiet. I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen downstairs and the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I slipped into my office, the same way I had countless times before, and locked the door behind me. The safe was there, sitting in the corner, its cold metal gleaming under the dim light of the desk lamp. My fingers hesitated on the dial. A part of me wanted to stop, to turn away, to leave things alone. But the other part of me, the part that had spent years protecting this family, this legacy, urged me to keep going. I couldn't let Richard or anyone else tear it apart. Not when I had worked so hard for everything we had. I slowly turned the dial, the numbers clicking in place. As I twisted it one final time, there was a satisfying click, and the safe's door swung open. Inside, I found a few things I expected: old documents, some financial records, and a few family mementos. But then, I saw something else, something that immediately caught my eye. It was a folder, its edges worn and yellowed with age. It had my name on it. And under it, another folder, labeled simply, Richard. My heart skipped a beat as I carefully pulled both folders from the safe. The first one was filled with old business contracts, financial statements, and tax records. The second one, however, was far more concerning. As I flipped through the papers, I found a series of handwritten notes, notes that detailed specific actions Richard had taken over the last few months. There were references to conversations with lawyers, vague mentions of ownership rights and control of assets. But the most chilling part was a single note written in red ink, almost as though someone was trying to make a point: I have everything under control. Once the safe is mine, nothing can stop me. My stomach turned. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Richard wasn't just interested in the company's finances. He had been planning something, and it wasn't for the good of the business. He was after control. He wanted to take everything from me, from my family, and I had been too blind to see it until now. I couldn't sit on this information. I had to tell Rachel, had to warn her before it was too late. But I also knew I had to be careful. Richard had already shown he could manipulate situations to his advantage. If I told Rachel without the proper evidence, I could risk losing her trust forever. I needed more. I needed to catch him in the act, to expose him for the fraud he was. The next morning, I decided to take a step I never thought I would. I called my lawyer, Emily Williams. Emily had been with us for years, and I trusted her with everything. If there was a way to protect what was rightfully mine, she would know how to handle it. I explained the situation to her, omitting no detail, and asked her to come over as soon as possible. By the time Emily arrived that afternoon, I had a plan. We would have to move quickly, quietly, and make sure that Richard didn't catch on until it was too late. Emily listened carefully, then nodded, her face serious. "Margaret, this is more than just a family dispute. This sounds like a power grab. And we can't let him get away with it." "I know," I replied, my voice steady but laced with a quiet fury. "I'm not going to let him destroy everything Thomas and I built. Not now, not ever." The two of us worked together, carefully going over the documents I had found. Emily suggested that we start by following the paper trail, find out exactly what Richard had been up to behind the scenes. There were legal steps we could take to protect the company and its assets, but it wasn't going to be easy. Richard had already positioned himself in a way that made him seem indispensable to the business. But I wasn't going to back down. No matter how long it took, I would fight to protect my family's legacy. That night, as I sat in my office once more, I stared at the safe, its empty compartment staring back at me. I thought about everything I had to lose. And for the first time in years, I realized something. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, for making sure my family didn't fall victim to Richard's greed. The days that followed were a blur of secrecy and calculated moves. With Emily's help, I started gathering every bit of evidence I could find. We had to be methodical. Richard had no idea what was coming, and I wasn't going to let him see it coming. I spent hours in my office, going over the financial records, carefully cataloging every detail, cross-referencing every transaction that seemed even remotely suspicious. Richard's name kept popping up in places it shouldn't have, small mentions in emails, mentions of legal consultations in my husband's name, strange meetings that I had never been told about. It was all starting to come together, like a puzzle, and I was determined to fit the pieces together before Richard realized I was onto him. But it wasn't just the paper trail that concerned me. It was his behavior. Ever since I caught him trying to access the safe, Richard had been acting strange. He wasn't showing up at the house as much. He started working longer hours at the office, and when he did come home, he was distant. Rachel, of course, didn't notice anything, or if she did, she didn't say anything. To her, Richard was the same man she had married, charming, ambitious, always looking out for their future. I could see the way she looked at him. She trusted him completely. And I couldn't risk that trust being shattered by the truth until I had irrefutable evidence. I knew I couldn't do this alone. Richard was smart, far smarter than I gave him credit for, and if I made even one wrong move, everything would blow up in my face. Emily and I spoke often, trying to stay one step ahead of him. But I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. He was moving fast, and I had to act faster. Then, one evening, as I sat at my desk with papers spread out in front of me, the phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice was sharp, urgent. "Margaret, you need to meet me. I've got something." I didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. When I arrived at Emily's office, her expression was grim. She had a thick folder on her desk, and as she slid it toward me, I could see the weight of what she was holding. The folder was marked with a single word, Richard. I opened it slowly, the tension thick in the air. Inside were several documents, emails, financial statements, and most importantly, a series of contracts that Richard had signed with external investors. Some of the contracts were for loans, others were for acquisitions, but all of them had one thing in common: they were signed without my knowledge, without the approval of the company's board, and in many cases, they were signed under dubious terms. "Look at this," Emily said, pointing to one of the contracts. "Richard has been secretly borrowing money from investors without your approval, and these terms are ridiculously one-sided. If this goes unnoticed, it'll give him control of the company, not you." My mind raced. I scanned the document in front of me, my heart hammering in my chest. I had known something was wrong, but this was far worse than I could have ever imagined. Richard wasn't just trying to access the company's safe or get more control over the business. He was actively undermining me, creating a web of debts and obligations that would leave me powerless. "I can't believe it," I said, my voice shaking. "He's been doing this behind my back. All this time, I thought he was helping. I thought he was loyal to me. And now I see it. He's been playing a game this whole time." Emily's expression softened, though I could see the concern in her eyes. "We have to move quickly. The longer you wait, the harder it will be to undo what he's done. If this gets out, the company could be ruined." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The company, my company, was being torn apart by the very person I had welcomed into my family. Richard wasn't just after money, he was after everything. My legacy, my family's future, it was all on the line. "I can't let him win," I said, my voice steady now, a fire igniting inside me. "We need to stop him, Emily. We need to expose him before he can do any more damage." Emily nodded. "We'll need to gather more evidence, Margaret. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Richard's been clever, but I have a feeling he's left a trail, and we're going to find it." And so, that's what we did. We dug deeper. Emily took charge of contacting a few of the company's lawyers, the ones Richard hadn't yet involved in his schemes, to see what we could uncover from the legal side. Meanwhile, I continued to focus on the financial records, trying to piece together the full scope of Richard's activities. But as we worked, I began to realize just how deeply entrenched he was in the business. The more I uncovered, the more I saw how he had carefully laid the groundwork for this takeover, making sure he had all the pieces in place before making his move. One evening, as I was going through the company's bank statements, something caught my eye. A transfer of funds, a large sum, had been sent to an offshore account, one that I didn't recognize. It wasn't unusual for the company to do business internationally, but this account was different. It was a personal account, not tied to any official business. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "Emily," I called, my voice tight with excitement. "I think I've found something." She rushed over to my desk, and I showed her the transaction. Her eyes widened when she saw the amount. "This is it," she said quietly. "This is how he's been laundering the money. He's been moving it offshore to cover his tracks. If we can prove this, we can stop him cold." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of what we had uncovered settling over me. We weren't just dealing with a man trying to steal a company. We were dealing with someone who was actively trying to destroy everything we had built, all while hiding behind a facade of charm and loyalty. But Richard had underestimated one thing: family. I had always been the protector of this family, and I wasn't about to let him take it from me without a fight. I had always believed that the hardest part of any confrontation was the first step, the moment you decided to face the truth, no matter the consequences. But as I sat in the quiet of my office, waiting for Richard to arrive, I realized I had underestimated just how difficult this moment would be. I wasn't just confronting him about his actions, I was confronting the man who had married my daughter, the man I had welcomed into our family. I was about to shatter every illusion I'd ever had about him. I had to be calm, calculated. If I lost control, I risked everything. Richard was nothing if not clever, and if I allowed him to manipulate me in any way, I'd lose my chance to expose him for what he really was. This wasn't just about the business anymore. This was about everything, about protecting my family's legacy, about preserving the trust that had been built over years of hard work. My hands were steady as I gathered the evidence Emily and I had uncovered. The offshore accounts. The fraudulent contracts. The loans signed under false pretenses. I had everything I needed. All it took now was the courage to confront him, and to be prepared for the consequences. The doorbell rang. I stood up from my desk, my heart thudding in my chest. I had arranged for Richard to come over to discuss family matters, a neutral subject to lure him in without suspicion. He wouldn't know what was coming. I had no intention of making this a drawn-out affair. I needed him to hear everything at once, to see the full scope of his betrayal. I opened the door to find Richard standing there, looking as composed as ever. His sharp suit and well-groomed appearance masked the predator I had come to see beneath his charm. He smiled at me, that same practiced smile he'd always used to win people over. But today, I wasn't fooled. "Margaret," he said, stepping inside. "You wanted to talk?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "Please, have a seat. This will only take a few minutes." I gestured to the chair across from me, and he took a seat without hesitation. His eyes were scanning the room, as if he were looking for something, perhaps a clue that I knew what he had been up to. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing any signs of doubt in me. I sat down at my desk and pushed the folder toward him. "Richard, I know what you've been doing," I said, my voice firm. "I've seen the contracts. I've seen the transactions. I know about the money you've been siphoning off to your offshore accounts." His expression didn't change, but I could see the faintest twitch in his eye. He was trying to maintain control, trying to keep the mask of the doting husband and loyal businessman intact. But I wasn't having it anymore. The mask was slipping, and I was determined to tear it off. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice smooth. "Too smooth. You're mistaken. I've been nothing but transparent with you, Margaret. You've always trusted me." "Don't lie to me, Richard," I said, cutting him off. "You've been secretly borrowing money from investors behind my back. You've signed contracts that you had no right to sign. And most importantly, you've been planning to take control of this company. You've been planning to destroy everything I've worked for. Everything Thomas and I built. And I'm not going to stand by and let you take it." His eyes hardened, the false charm fading into something colder. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "You don't understand, Margaret. This was never about destroying you. It was about taking what's rightfully mine. I've worked for this. I've done everything I could to help this company grow. But you never gave me the credit I deserved. You never treated me as an equal. And now, I'm going to take what's mine." My heart pounded in my chest. I could feel the weight of his words, the venom behind them. But I refused to let him have the upper hand. "You don't get to claim what's yours, Richard. Not when you've stolen it. Not when you've betrayed this family. You've been plotting behind my back for months, and now it's over. I've got the evidence to prove everything you've done." I opened the folder and slid the contracts and bank statements across the table to him. His eyes darted to the papers, and for the first time, I saw something like panic flicker in his gaze. He quickly masked it, but it was too late. He knew I had him. He picked up the papers, scanning them quickly, his face growing increasingly pale as he realized that there was no way out. The lies, the manipulation, the greed, it was all laid bare in front of him, in front of both of us. He was caught. "You think this is over?" he spat, his voice rising. "You think I'm just going to roll over and let you take everything? You have no idea what I've done to get to this point. You're just a fool who doesn't see the bigger picture." I stood up from my chair, pushing it back with a force that echoed in the room. "The only fool here is you, Richard. You thought you could tear this family apart, that you could destroy everything we've built for your own gain. But you were wrong. You underestimated me, and now you'll pay for it." I could feel the weight of his eyes on me, but I didn't falter. I was done being intimidated. I wasn't just a mother-in-law. I wasn't just a businesswoman. I was someone who had spent years building something worth protecting, and I wasn't going to let a man like him destroy it. Not now. Not ever. Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You'll regret this, Margaret," he said, his voice cold, his tone more of a threat than anything else. "You'll see. You'll regret ever trying to expose me." I didn't flinch. "If there's one thing I've learned, Richard, it's that the truth always comes out in the end. And when it does, you'll have nothing left. Not the company. Not Rachel. Nothing." He gave me one last look of pure hatred before storming out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of his retreating footsteps. The adrenaline was still coursing through me, my heart racing as the reality of what I had just done started to sink in. I had confronted him. I had exposed him for what he truly was. And now, there was no turning back. The next few days were a blur of uncertainty and tension. The confrontation with Richard hadn't gone as I had expected, it had been far worse, in a way. His reaction was something I hadn't fully anticipated. He was furious, more dangerous than I had ever seen him, and it was clear he wasn't going to back down easily. He had underestimated me, sure, but Richard wasn't the type to simply let things go when his back was against the wall. And now, he was desperate. I spent the better part of the following morning reviewing the evidence again, making sure everything was in order. Emily had already started contacting the lawyers, and we had set up a meeting to discuss how best to proceed. The evidence was damning. There was no way Richard could deny what he had done. But I had no illusions about what would happen next. He would fight back. He would try to destroy me, just as he had tried to destroy everything Thomas and I had built. That evening, as I was getting ready for dinner, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Rachel was still out with the kids, and Thomas had gone on one of his routine business trips, leaving me alone for the night. But when I opened the door, I found Richard standing there, a strained smile on his face. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. I stood in the doorway, my expression guarded. "I think we've said everything that needs to be said, Richard," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "You've been caught. There's no escaping that now." He stepped forward, and for a moment, I almost felt a pang of sympathy. But then I remembered everything he had done, the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, and the feeling vanished as quickly as it had come. "Margaret," he said, his voice taking on a softer tone. "Please, just hear me out. I didn't want any of this. You have to understand, I was just trying to protect our future. I thought I was doing the right thing." I shook my head, my anger flaring. "No, Richard. You weren't protecting anyone. You were taking everything you could for yourself. You used me, you used Rachel, you used this family. And now you're trying to act like it was all for some noble cause? Spare me." He looked down at his feet for a moment, and when he looked back up, I could see the desperation in his eyes. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to fix them. I've been in over my head, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Please, don't take this further. I'll step away from the company. I'll give it all up. Just don't tell Rachel. Don't ruin her life." It was then that I realized how far Richard had gone, how deeply he had buried himself in lies and deceit. He wasn't just afraid of losing the company. He was terrified of losing Rachel, of losing the carefully crafted image he had built for himself. And in that moment, I almost felt pity for him. Almost. But pity wasn't going to save him. Not now. "Richard," I said, my voice steady. "You've made your bed. You've chosen this path. You've lied, you've manipulated, and you've betrayed everyone in this family. And you think you can just walk away from that? No. This has gone too far." He stepped forward again, his voice now pleading. "I'm sorry, Margaret. I truly am. Just give me one more chance. I can fix this. I'll make it right. Just please, don't go public with this. Don't ruin my life. I swear, I'll never ask for anything again." I'll step aside. I'll do whatever you want. I couldn't help but notice how his hands were trembling, how his voice cracked with the weight of his desperation. He wasn't a man pleading for his own life, though. He was a man pleading for his own power. And that was something I couldn't afford to let go unchecked. You're right about one thing, Richard, I said coldly. You will step aside. But not because you ask. You'll step aside because the evidence is too strong. Because this company, this family, will never belong to you. For a moment, there was silence between us. Richard stood frozen, his eyes wide, as if he were trying to process what I had just said. And then, as if a switch had been flipped, his demeanor changed. His face hardened, the pleading expression disappearing into something colder, something more dangerous. You think you've won, he said, his voice now dangerously low. You think I'm just going to walk away and let you take everything? You're wrong, Margaret. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I'm not going to let you destroy me. Not like this. I stared at him, my resolve unwavering. You're already destroyed, Richard. This is the end for you. He turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him with such force that the house seemed to shake. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of his retreating footsteps, the weight of his words still hanging in the air. I knew this wasn't over. Richard wasn't the type of man to give up easily, and I had no doubt he'd make another move, perhaps even a more desperate one. But I had made my stance clear. I wasn't backing down. That night, as I sat alone in my office, I couldn't shake the feeling that Richard was already planning his next move. He had shown his true colors, and now, I had to be ready for whatever he threw at me next. The following days were tense, but I remained calm. Richard had made his threat, and I had responded with unwavering certainty. I had seen the way he was willing to push things to the edge, but now, I was the one holding the cards. I didn't expect him to just disappear into the night, but the silence that followed our confrontation was unsettling. Something was off, and I could feel it in the air. By Thursday evening, I had resolved to follow through with my plan. Emily had spoken to the lawyers, and everything was set. The next step was to bring this all to light, to put the wheels in motion before Richard could do any more damage. The meeting with the board was scheduled, and we had gathered everything we needed, documents, evidence, and a clear strategy for the next phase. It felt like the calm before the storm. But then, out of nowhere, Richard called me. I had no idea how he had gotten my personal number. He wasn't supposed to have it, and I hadn't given it to him. Yet, there it was on my phone, flashing across the screen. I didn't pick up immediately. I let it ring, my mind racing. What could he possibly want now? More lies? More manipulation? I waited until the voicemail beeped before I played it. His voice sounded different this time. There was a tremor to it, an edge of fear I had never heard before. Margaret, I need to talk to you. I don't know how to say this, but I've been keeping something from you. Something that you need to know. Please, just give me a chance to explain. I'll be at the house tomorrow morning. I'm sorry for everything. Please just listen. My heart skipped a beat. Richard had always been manipulative, but there was something about his tone now that unsettled me. It was more than guilt, it was fear. The kind of fear you can't fake. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I wondered if there was more to this than I had originally thought. I knew I had to meet with him. I had no choice. If Richard was truly offering an explanation, if there was more at play than just his greed, I needed to know what it was. But there was another part of me that was afraid of what he might reveal. I couldn't help but wonder if there was something deeper behind his actions, something that would make all of this, his betrayal, his lies, seem even more twisted than I had originally thought. The next morning, I arrived at the house early, before Rachel and the kids would be back. The silence in the living room was deafening as I waited. I had made sure the staff was elsewhere, giving me privacy. I needed this confrontation to be alone, just Richard and me. And then, he walked in. He looked different. Gone was the confident, polished Richard the First had known. The man standing in front of me looked exhausted, vulnerable even. His suit was rumpled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes, those cold eyes, were now filled with something I hadn't seen before, desperation. "Margaret," he said, his voice shaky. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." I didn't speak immediately. I just motioned to the chair across from me. "Sit down," I said, my voice steady. "I'll listen. But know this, I'm done with the games, Richard. This is the last time. You're going to tell me everything." He swallowed hard before sitting down, wringing his hands together as if he were trying to find the right words. It wasn't the usual manipulative confidence. For the first time, I felt like I was looking at a man who was truly scared. "I know I've lied to you," he began, his voice cracking. "I know I've manipulated you, and I've tried to control everything. But what you don't know is why. The truth is, I wasn't just doing this for the company. I wasn't doing this for me." My brow furrowed. "Then who, Richard? Who were you doing this for?" He looked away for a moment, his eyes flickering as if he were searching for something, some way to tell this story, to make it sound less monstrous. He opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it, as if the words were too heavy for him to say. Finally, he looked back at me, his expression tortured. I was doing this for Rachel," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry. I know I've hurt her, I know I've hurt you, but it's not what you think. There's something you need to understand, something I've kept from everyone, including you." My heart skipped a beat. "Rachel. What did Rachel have to do with any of this?" "I don't follow," I said, my voice sharp now. "What are you talking about? What have you kept from me?" Richard hesitated, his hands trembling as he sat back in the chair. He was clearly struggling with the words, but something inside of me, some instinct, told me I was about to hear something that would change everything. "Rachel. Rachel is the one who's been pushing for all of this. She's been telling me for months that I need to take control. She said that you were holding the business back, that you were too old-fashioned, too cautious. She wanted me to do what I could to make the company thrive. To take it to the next level. And I didn't want to disappoint her. I didn't want to let her down." My blood ran cold. "You're telling me Rachel has been behind this? She's the one who wanted me out?" Richard nodded slowly, looking away. "I didn't want to do it, Margaret. But she was so convincing. She's been pushing me, pushing us, to make these moves. To take risks. And I thought if I could prove myself to her, maybe she'd finally see me as an equal, as someone worthy of being her partner. But I was wrong. I should have told you the truth. I shouldn't have lied." The room seemed to close in on me as Richard's words sank in. My daughter, the one person I had trusted the most in this world, was part of this betrayal. She had been the one behind it all, manipulating Richard, encouraging him to take everything I had worked for. It was a blow that I hadn't expected. It shattered everything I had thought I knew about my family. My voice faltered, and I had to stop myself from saying more. I couldn't believe it. "Why didn't you tell me, Richard? Why didn't you say anything? Why let it go this far?" "I was trying to protect her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought if I did what she wanted, if I played the part she wanted, it would all work out. But I was wrong. I can see that now." The weight of his words crashed down on me, and I sat there for a long time, the silence between us hanging heavy in the air. I had been betrayed, not just by Richard, but by my own daughter. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to fix it. I spent the next few hours in a haze, my thoughts swirling around everything Richard had just revealed. Rachel. My daughter. The person I had raised, loved, and trusted most of all. How could she have been the mastermind behind all of this? How could she have manipulated Richard into doing something so terrible? I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, and I didn't know where to stand anymore. It was nearly dinner time when Rachel called, asking if I was ready for their usual Sunday family meal. I almost didn't pick up. I almost ignored the call altogether. But then I realized I couldn't run from this. I had to face it. I had to face her. And I needed to know the truth. I gathered my thoughts and took a deep breath before answering. "Hi, Rachel," I said, trying to keep my voice as steady as possible. "Hey, Mom," she replied, her voice light and cheerful. "What's up? Are you ready for dinner? The kids are excited to see you." I could hear the faint sound of the kids in the background, laughing and shouting, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. I felt a pang in my chest, but I pushed it aside. I needed to focus. I needed to get to the heart of this. "I need to talk to you, Rachel," I said, my voice serious. "About Richard." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a faint sigh. "Mom, I know you're upset with him," she said, her tone more defensive than usual. "But he's been under a lot of pressure lately. The business has been." "No, Rachel," I cut her off, my voice firm now. "This is not about Richard. This is about you. What you've been doing. What you've been planning behind my back." There was another long pause. The sound of the kids laughing in the background faded as Rachel's silence stretched on. I could hear the tension building between us, and I knew she was trying to figure out how to respond. But the words I had to say weren't going to be easy. "Mom, what are you talking about?" she asked, her voice quiet now, a hint of confusion creeping in. "What's this all about?" I didn't mince words. "Richard told me everything, Rachel. He told me you've been pushing him to take control of the company. You've been telling him to make moves behind my back, to go over my head and take things away from me. He's been doing everything you wanted, everything you pushed him to do. And I have to ask you, why? Why would you do this to me?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But then I heard her speak again, her voice tight, as if she were holding something back. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "I never meant for you to find out. I wanted what was best for all of us. For the family. You've always kept everything so tightly wound, Mom. You've always been so protective of the business, of everything. But things have changed. The company needs to grow, it needs to adapt. And I thought if we didn't make a move, we'd be left behind." I felt the anger rising in my chest again. "So, you thought the best way to help the company was to tear me down? To push me out? Behind my back? Rachel, I've been doing this for years. I built this business from nothing, and I've always made sure it was a family legacy. You don't get to take that from me." She sighed heavily, her voice now strained. "I didn't mean for it to be like this. I didn't mean to hurt you. But I felt like I had to do something. You've been stuck in the past, Mom. You've been too cautious. The world is changing, and I wanted us to move forward. I wanted us to be more than what we are. Richard, he was willing to help me. He said we could take control and build something bigger than what you've left us." I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. "That's not how this works, Rachel. You can't just manipulate people, tear the family apart, and call it progress. You can't sacrifice everything we've built for ambition and greed. You've broken my trust. And worse, you've broken the trust of this family." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could feel Rachel trying to process everything, trying to hold on to whatever she thought was right. But it was clear, she wasn't the person I thought she was. She had chosen ambition over family, and I didn't know if that could be undone. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, her voice barely audible now. "I just wanted more. More for all of us. More for the family." I closed my eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. The family doesn't need more, Rachel. It needs honesty. It needs loyalty. And right now, I don't know if I can trust you anymore. There was no response for a long moment. When Rachel spoke again, her voice was small, almost defeated. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said. I never wanted it to go this far. I was wrong. I just wanted to make things better. I let out a slow, controlled breath. The truth was out now. The betrayal, the manipulation, it was all on the table. And while Rachel had admitted her role in it, I didn't know if that was enough to fix the damage. She had crossed a line. And whether she knew it or not, the consequences of her actions were far more severe than she could imagine. Sorry doesn't change what's been done, Rachel, I said quietly. But we'll figure this out. We have to. But you've broken my trust, and that's something that can't be easily fixed. I understand, she whispered. I'll make it right, Mom. I swear. But I didn't know if she could. The days following that conversation with Rachel were some of the hardest I'd ever experienced. The betrayal I had felt was overwhelming, not just because of Richard's actions, but because of what Rachel had become, a person I no longer recognized. I had spent so many years teaching her about loyalty, family, and integrity. And now, it felt as though everything had been thrown away for the sake of ambition, greed, and an unchecked desire for control. In the week that followed, Emily and I moved forward with the legal actions. We filed claims to seize control of the company's assets back from the offshore accounts Richard had set up. I contacted the board and briefed them on everything that had happened, providing them with the evidence we'd gathered. It wasn't easy, there was a lot of resistance. Some members were sympathetic to Richard, while others were unsure how to proceed. But in the end, the truth came out, and the board voted to remove Richard from any position of influence within the company. But the real battle was still ahead. The issue of Rachel was more complicated than anything I could have imagined. She was my daughter, the person I had spent so many years nurturing and protecting. And yet, she had proven herself to be willing to destroy everything I had worked for. I wasn't sure if there was any way to mend what had been broken. Rachel came to my office a few days after our conversation, looking tired, remorseful. Her face was pale, and she didn't speak at first. She simply stood there, her hands clasped in front of her, as if waiting for me to say something. I could see the weight of her actions hanging on her shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, I saw vulnerability in her eyes. Mom, I know I've ruined everything, she said quietly, her voice low and hesitant. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I've learned something. I've learned that the company, the legacy, none of it matters if we don't have family. I was so focused on trying to make something bigger, but I lost sight of what was right in front of me. I didn't respond right away. I just watched her, trying to decide if I should give her a chance to explain further. But the truth was, I had already heard everything I needed to hear. What mattered now was what I chose to do about it. I don't know if I can trust you again, Rachel, I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. You crossed a line. And I don't know how we move forward from here. Tears welled up in her eyes as she took a step closer. I know, Mom. I don't blame you for being angry. I know what I did was wrong, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix it. I can't undo what's been done, but I want to prove to you that I can still be the daughter you raised me to be. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting her words sink in. The decision I had to make was one of the hardest I had ever faced. If I forgave her, could I truly trust her again? Could I bring her back into the fold of the company without constantly wondering if she was trying to tear it down again? And if I didn't forgive her, what would that mean for our relationship, for our family? I had spent so many years building the company, protecting it, nurturing it. But in the end, it wasn't just about the business. It was about the people in my life, the ones I loved, the ones I had fought for. And while Rachel had betrayed me, she was still my daughter. The question was, could I move past her mistakes and rebuild the trust between us? I'll give you a chance, Rachel, I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. But you have to prove to me that you can be trusted. You have to show me that you're willing to work for the family, not just for yourself. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I will, Mom. I promise. I'll do whatever it takes. It was then that I realized the truth. This wasn't just about business. It was about family. It was about rebuilding what had been broken, piece by piece, even if it took years. Richard was gone, and I had no intention of ever letting him near the company again. But Rachel, my daughter, still had a place in my heart. I couldn't give up on her completely. "All right," I said, standing up from my chair. "We'll start over. But this time, there will be no more secrets. No more manipulation. It's time to rebuild, Rachel. And if you're truly committed to this, we'll rebuild together." She nodded again, her face a mixture of relief and determination. And as she left my office that day, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be challenges ahead. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let anyone, family or not, destroy what I had worked so hard for. The legacy would remain intact, and this time, we would do it the right way. Epilogue. The company slowly but steadily recovered, with Rachel proving herself time and again. The scars of the past would never fully disappear, but they became a reminder of the importance of loyalty, trust, and family. Richard, on the other hand, never returned. He had tried to take everything, but in the end, he had lost it all. As for me, I found peace in the knowledge that I had protected the family legacy, not just in business, but in life. And though the path ahead wasn't without its challenges, I knew one thing for sure: family came first. Always. Author's note. This story touches on the difficult and painful reality of betrayal within a family, especially when those closest to us break our trust. But it also highlights the power of forgiveness and the strength needed to rebuild what's been broken. Margaret's journey wasn't just about protecting her business, it was about understanding what truly mattered: her family. In the end, it's not just about what we've built, but about the relationships we nurture along the way.